Hi guys. Today we have outstanding guest, Grand Strem from Proton Energy. And today we will discuss the clean energy, one of the most important topic right now on that planet. Hi Grant, thank you to be with us. And could you introduce your project in short, like to explain to our viewers like the key points related to what's going on with you and what's going on with Proton Energy.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be on your event. Proton makes hydrogen from old oil fields with zero emissions. We do that by injecting oxygen from the air into the oil field. It causes chemical reactions, and some of those reactions release hydrogen. We trap the CO2 in the ground and produce hydrogen for sale. Hydrogen can be used for electricity production, as a fuel, or even for making things like ammonia or fertilizers.
Wonderful. So it feels like that you are somehow extending the oil industry, or you completely change the way we produce oil or working with oil as a source of energy.
Yeah, oil is the source of energy for our process. Usually there will be some enhanced recovery on the side. It doesn't need to be the case. In some countries, oil production is not allowed, in certain European countries, for example. In many cases, it will be desired, and most people who like electric vehicles also like asphalt roads and rubber tires. So carbon commodities, we plan to stop selling into the liquid fuel market, oil, and actually just only concentrate on the carbon commodities market for the carbon aspect of our business, and asphalt being the primary direction for that. But our main focus is sequestering CO2 as carbonate rock within the same oil field and producing hydrogen from that oil field.
Got it. So you actually extending the oil industry. You are, let's say, some very powerful addition to that multi-billion or even multi-trillion, to be honest, oil industry. So yes, it's truly beautiful. Can you tell more about the clear hydrogen process, how it's working, what's going on during that clear hydrogen production?
Okay. To make clear hydrogen, we start with cryogenic distillation. So we have to cool the air until the oxygen turns to a liquid. And then we take that pure oxygen and warm it back up so it goes to high pressure, it flashes back to a gas. And then with that high pressure, we can actually pull in additional CO2. So if we have CO2 sources from other emissions or direct air capture even, we can suck that into the oxygen and get it using the Venturi effect and get it into the ground with no extra compression of the CO2. This is depending on how much CO2 gets injected and turned to carbonate rock in the system. We can get the carbon intensity of the overall system to go lower than zero. So clear hydrogen is defined in that way as carbon intensity lower than zero, and the additional piece is no fresh water required. So inside an oil field, there's always some amount of water already there, usually quite a lot. And in fact, there's usually a big, thick bottom water zone. So if we inject the CO2 and the oxygen into the bottom water, the oxygen bubbles up and rises up to react with the oil. And that triggers some hydrogen productive reactions, especially water gas shift. And the CO2 turns to carbonate rock. And when it turns to carbonate rock within the bottom water, that also releases some additional hydrogen through that reaction. So it's almost like a direct CO2 to hydrogen concept.
You know, I have heard about that from all terraformation, let's say, terraformation initiatives and researches during the 20th century, when we are thinking about, let's say, to colonize other planets. So I have seen something like that, but it feels like you have hundreds of more new inventions to, let's say, to create that process and actually make it happen. Is it your R&D lab, or you are working with some guys? So how it's, because it seems like it's definitely high tech. It's very beautiful, very interesting, inventive solution. who is responsible for all of that bright ideas and let's say an application?
I think we weren't brilliant people who came up with this. We looked at old data sets from examples throughout history where hydrogen was accidentally produced out of oil fields through high temperature recovery processes. And every time throughout history, there's been a high temperature oil recovery process, it always generates hydrogen. So some of them were much more interesting in the past than others in terms of their productivity of hydrogen. And so trying to replicate even just a fraction of some of the historical database seemed like an easy thing to do to get to economic hydrogen rates. So we patented around the idea and different concepts in relation to this in over 100 countries. And when I say we, one of my former professors from the University of Calgary and I, so my background, I'm a geologist, but at one point I was working for ConocoPhillips and did a reservoir characterization master's degree, which was mostly engineering classes, and became friends with one of the professors. And about 10 years later, he was showing me this data set with a huge amount of hydrogen from the 1980s in a project in Canada. And my jaw dropped. I thought, wow, that's a total clean energy vector. We have massive infrastructure. Nobody wants a depleted oil field. And by depleted oil field, it just means it's reached its economic limits. So it's depressurized and the oil is no longer making its way at economic rates through the pores in the rock towards the production well. But it's much easier for oxygen to go find the oil to react with. So it's quite a simple concept.
Is it dangerous? Because it feels like the hydrogen should be, let's say, controlled very well. Because how you, let's say, solve that problem? It's kind of tricky. It sounds tricky. Because it feels like very dangerous to operate in that manner. What's your approach to control all of that? Let's say for that process.
Well, if you look at industrial safety, since the 1850s, the late 1850s, people have been producing oil in very haphazard ways all around the world. They still do. There's parts of the world where they literally collect it in buckets and carry it somewhere. So it has a very well-known relative safety factor. Little children are loading gasoline into lawnmowers for their dad on the weekend. It's a well-constrained thing. Hydrogen has always been known to be more challenging to deal with. So there was, during World War II in California, a series of industrial accidents for thermally enhanced oil recovery, where the hydrogen in the produced stream did cause massive fires and problems because they were not using appropriate safety technologies. So based on that experiences of 80 years ago in the industrial safety codes that arose because of it, people just take it more seriously. So actually there are less, even though it's a more volatile chemical, there are less accidents because everybody knows it must be handled with care and specialized equipment. So we just follow the safety codes and standards that have been invented 80 years ago and
improved. Yes, because it's I'm representing my audience. I'm representing, let's say, the general viewers, and most of them actually have some concerns related to the hydrogen production. Maybe they have that old oil fields near their houses or near their somewhere. So they still it's important to know that the safety of that process improved, because it's also part of the deal. Because let's be honest, we have nuclear energy, but nobody in let's say in Europe willing to, let's say, to recover and, let's say, act upon that opportunity because of all of that concern. So producing the hydrogen, you also need to be, everybody needs to be in safe place working with that type of production. It's just very, very important. Secondary, regarding the hydrogen market, because I know a lot of initiatives, and who will actually use those hydrogen? Is it just a hydrogen to produce electricity, or it's hydrogen to, let's say, to work as a fuel in some, let's say, hybrid cars or whatever? So could you just a little bit explain us the hydrogen market, if you
Yes. Most people are thinking about hydrogen as more expensive than natural gas. So if you're assuming you buy natural gas, do something to it like steam methane reforming or pyrolysis, and one of the byproducts, other than losses and things like that, is hydrogen. That means that hydrogen will never be as inexpensive for energy unit as the natural gas that went into it. So it can still be cheaper than diesel and gasoline, and it is still needed for ammonia and different things like that. But it's not. The only process I know of that has a significant cost reduction compared to natural gas is ours. So we are very interested in looking at, thank you. We're very interested.
It's very painful moment right now, because you know what's going on right now in Europe. It's actually all about that fucking gas. We have so many political problems. We have so many let's say personal problems in our lives. I mean in Europe right now, because of that fucking gas. So if you have a real solution, and you could, let's say, help Euro Commission to make right steps right now, you will actually could save the fucking Europe.
I think it's enormously important for energy and food security to have local supplies of cheap hydrogen. Yes. And yeah, so if it's made lower cost than natural gas, and as you know, yes, there's geopolitics and very, very significant problems with the gas markets in Europe. Not only price, but yes, the other
dependencies.
So if we have a way to spin turbines using hydrogen as the fuel instead of natural gas, then everybody benefits from that. You have a local supplier, there's local taxation, there's jobs in that area, and the hydrogen can also be used for making crop fertilizers locally. So I think it's hugely important for Europe. There already is some hydrogen blending into natural gas, but in this way, if it's made in a way that's less expensive, then that's profitable to just simply blend into high temperature industries like metals, cement and steel, even industrial heating, things like these.
So you're doing so important job. The first impression, like it's one of the most important things on earth right now. What do you think about Norway? Because it feels like the oil plants in Norway could help you with your let's say technology, or just correct me, it's not for you. What kind of let's say oil producers in Europe could collaborate with you to, let's say, to add that opportunity to their, let's say, portfolio?
Well, we're starting relatively small. So one of our licensees, for example, plans to do 5,000 tons per day hydrogen in offshore UK. So that works out to 28,000 tons per day of ammonia, which is their plan for shipping it to markets. So some will go directly into fertilizer, and some will be used to power data centers and things like this.
Wow.
5,000 tons a day is a starting point of hydrogen, but the geological possibility throughout the whole UK North Sea is much larger than that. And certainly the Norwegian North Sea is also far, far larger geological potential. Some of the challenges are finalizing the design of the floating production ship. So we need, on a big FPSO, an air separation unit. So you get the oxygen for the ground and the nitrogen for the ammonia vessel. You need a turbine. So some of the hydrogen you produce, a little bit of it needs to power the air separation unit. And then the turbine exhaust waste heat helps warm up the nitrogen and the hydrogen in an ammonia production vessel. And then you need some storage and offloading onto tanker ships for ammonia. So that's the concept for the UK North Sea, which will be identical to everywhere else offshore, including Norway. If it's near shore, you might be able to reach it with pipelines from the shore. And in that case, the relative ease and lack of complexity might favor like an onshore air separation unit.
Yes, but you know, the Europe, as I already mentioned, they are also let's say over protecting everything. So the offshore is the best way for you to, let's say, to be part of what's going on right now in Europe. Even near shore, I don't know that terminology, but near shore seems like a perfect solution, because everybody could accept something going on offshore. Not everybody really open to some advanced hydrogen production onshore. It's just a mentality. Even the gas prices, even the prices for their households, not even that. So how much money do you need, and how fast could you scale? Are you ready to support all of that initiatives, creating the, let's say, energy independence of Europe? What do you have for that? Is it possible for you having, let's say, 1 billion, 10 billions, whatever? Doesn't matter. It's not about, let's say, amount of money you need. It's just how fast could you scale with your solution, and what's stopping you by, if any?
Yeah, the geology is there, so the rate limiting step is money. Even if we produce huge volumes in Texas or Canada or somewhere else and ship it to Europe, that's all possible as well. So even if the local regulatory system goes slow, which I don't think it will, but if it did go slow for some reason, and every country in Europe is a little different, of course, but there is potential to bring it in from elsewhere. And yeah, our supply is limited by the amount of capital we have to build projects with. So it's also a displacement thing. So similar to the oil market or the LNG market, if we oversupply a market, like let's say we built out 50,000 tons a day hydrogen in Texas, then we can, we can increase the amount from others that's available globally for shipping to Europe. So I think on a net basis, it just needs to happen all over the place, all at once. It's logistically simpler and much more politically attractive if it's locally sourced in Europe for Europe.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I will try to share that interview with some of the decision makers from European Union. I'm also have a question about, let's say, general investors. What's your ROI? Could you, let's say, slightly explain? I mean, briefly, slightly explain the ROI of investment in that type of, let's say, hydrogen production, and what to expect for big guys investing in such project, let's say, in Europe?
There are several revenue streams, first of all. So most hydrogen production technologies only have really hydrogen as the saleable product, whereas we have several. When we take over an oil field and we add CO2, heat, and pressure, there is always some amount of an enhanced recovery from that existing field. So making the most use of the assets we have is an environmental ideal. So if we have wells that are drilled and roads that are paved and jobs that are nearby, and we can keep that infrastructure going, I think it's important to do that during the transition. Otherwise, there will be no transition if everybody is hungry, So it needs to be supported during the transition. So that's one revenue stream. In the next, I guess the next main ones, as we produce hydrogen, we're also sequestering CO2. So turning carbon dioxide into carbonate rock in the reservoir, that is something that you get paid for, especially in jurisdictions where there's a carbon tax. Canada will be $170 per ton by 2030. So that's coming up soon. Norway will be 200 euros per ton by 2030. So this is a huge economic incentive to turn CO2 into rock in the ground. So that's another revenue stream. Hydrogen sales support multiple things, but the air separation unit gives us nitrogen. It doesn't all have to be used for making ammonia on site. You can sell nitrogen into other purposes, purging pipelines. There is a nitrogen market. The other thing is we actually, in addition to hydrogen, of course, but the other thing is because we use cryogenic distillation of the air, we can use cold temperature heat exchange on the produced gas stream. So we actually can in a very narrow band, produce food grade CO2. Some of that will go into the synthetic jet fuel market. Some of it will be going to agriculture. Most of it we don't think there will be big enough markets to handle all the CO2 or buy it all and use it all. So we'll be turning most of it into carbonate rock, but that is an additional revenue stream example. We also liquefy out the methane. So there will be an LNG component, which we have the option, depending on which country we are in, to either sell it forward into the energy market directly, or we can inject it into the ground to be more fuel for making more hydrogen.
Wow. Just wow. Okay. What does the energy transition mean? What is it? Could you explain to our audience, because it's a huge topic, and let's hear that from you.
I think there's three aspects. The most important is cost. I want to see a collapse of cost structures of energy so that humanity can have the next renaissance. So if we have abundant energy at lower cost, or let's say more energy at the same cost, or the same energy at far lower cost, all of these things free up a huge amount of money and capital towards other projects like art, space programs. You know, there's so much you can do as a society if you're not burning all your money in energy. So that's the first thing, is cost. The second one is carbon intensity. That's very topical and a good proxy for air pollution. So if we can basically dial down our CO2 significantly throughout the thing, that is a transition from very high carbon intensity. On one end point, there's probably coal, and on the other is carbon negative, like our process, clear hydrogen. And then there's a whole spectrum in between, wind and solar being just above zero, not carbon negative on a life cycle intensity basis, not even zero, but still a far better improvement. And then the third one is ecological disturbance. So the world is only so big, and there's migratory birds and large birds that windmills don't like, and or I should say the birds don't like the big windmills. If you're in the desert building huge solar panels across the landscape, you're going to be affecting the local ecology. Maybe there's a rare lizard in the deserts, or maybe it's this or that. We do have an impact on the ecology. So whatever can be done at the smallest footprint, ideally on existing disturbances, that is another transition model. So one of the reasons I like nuclear is that it has a relatively small ecological disturbance. Carbon intensity, not so great. It's not so bad, but not so great. Cost, it's not so great, but you know, it's reliable and it's possible. But it also, yeah, I guess in total, nuclear's ecological disturbance is relatively small in comparison to many alternatives like wind and solar.
Yeah, got it. So Elmas Land aims to build the community of the future, where people live in peace with nature and use the latest technologies at the same time. Are there any ways to help Elmas Land become carbon-free using proton energy technologies? What are the possible ways for our cooperation?
Well, I guess there's education and awareness you're helping already. So getting the word out that this is a possibility. A lot of people think of hydrogen as electrolysis or blue hydrogen, but there are very, very large scale ways to use clear hydrogen, and just telling people that is often a big path in the right direction. Someone says, I like that. I'd like to buy a license and build this, or I'd like to buy a bunch of ammonia locally for use here. So it just,
yes,
yeah.
we could use your ammonia, by the way, for our gardening and our everything else. But it feels like, yes, the most important thing to calm down people with idea of hydrogen production and hydrogen, let's say, application around them, because hydrogen, we need to improve the hydrogen reputation as fast as possible, as much as possible. And if you could, let's say, help Europe with, let's say, energy independence somehow, I suppose a lot of big investors and big whales should think about to invest in you as fast as possible, because it's one of the most brightest way to produce energy, because you're just doing so much along the way, just making everything, every step counts. Like that's the true beauty. It feels like you have outstanding R&D team, or you are the genius. I don't know, but it feels like it's very well put together. From your pitch, it's not just pitch. It just does a process. It's very efficient. Like it's very bright approach towards, let's say, using every resource along the way. It was great honor for me to be with you today. It's great honor to introduce the Proton Energy for our viewers. We will add all the necessary links and researches in the comments down below, so for our viewers that they could, let's say, read more about you. And I personally will send that video to some of the decision makers, because it feels like that it's interesting and complicated opportunities. They should know about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me to your show.
Thank you.